Joins me now in an exclusive interview. He sits on the House Intel, Judiciary, and Homeland Security committees. He is also a former federal prosecutor. Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for being here.
You bet, Maria. Good to be with you.
Want to look ahead, but first take a look back. What is your takeaway from what you heard this past week?
Well, let's summarize. We heard from 3 witnesses this week. None of those 3 witnesses have met or spoken with President Trump in the last year. None of them were on the July 25th call in question. None of them have firsthand information of that call, of course. And as you just played, none of them are aware of any criminal activity or impeachable offense. So if you only get one chance to make a first impression, I think the impression of the American people is, what is this about and why are we here? What is Congress wasting our time with on yet another effort to frame the president for something else he didn't do?
So some of these testimonies have been leaked. Some of them have been out in the public view, but others not. What is the process in terms of getting certain things out and others not?
Well, the process is whatever Adam Schiff decides the process will be that day. Think of it this way, Maria. If you're accused of a crime, you show up and the person who's accused you of the crime is in charge of the trial. He decides what witnesses are going to be called, the order that they're going to be called in, how much they'll be allowed to testify, who will be allowed to ask them questions. That's what Republicans are dealing with, and I think the American people see that. So, we find out every day what the rules are going to be. The rules change every day. The testimony changes. The crimes that the president allegedly is accused of change. Just in this past week, Maria, we went from this was all about a quid pro quo to this was about extortion to this is about bribery. So we don't know what the crimes are going to be. And the other thing that was important that came out this week is, regardless of what they say about the crime and what it ultimately is, there's no victim for the crime. The alleged victim, the president of the Ukraine, has said there was no pressure, there were no conditions, there were no demands, there was nothing improper. It was a good call. I was happy with the call. So, you've got no crime and you've got no victim. That's the worst impeachment trial ever.
Yeah, especially since the whistleblower first brought us these allegations and Nancy Pelosi and colleagues wanted to talk with the whistleblower. We've got a letter here that Nancy Pelosi wrote the speaker to her colleagues saying that the administration needs to stop blocking the whistleblower from disclosing to Congress a serious possible breach of constitutional duties by the president. And yet now Adam Schiff says he does not want to speak to the whistleblower.
Right. So what we keep getting are parading through one ambassador or diplomat after another who doesn't know the president, hasn't spoken to the president, doesn't know what either president really thinks about what happened, and we're not hearing from the most important witnesses. The most important witnesses are the whistleblower who started this, Adam Schiff, who met with the whistleblower that got this started, and Hunter Biden, whose testimony became indispensable this week when we learned that it wasn't a sham, as Chairman Schiff said, to be asking questions about that. We found out that the Obama-Biden State Department was concerned about Hunter Biden's role on Burisma. We heard from Ambassador Yovanovitch and Mr. Kent, who both said they thought it presented a conflict of interest. When Republicans try and ask questions about that, we're gavelled down. So, again, this is headed summarily. The Democrats want to send this to the Senate without testimony from the most important witnesses.
Well, I think this is an interesting point that you bring up, because that did come out last week that, in fact, the Obama administration was prepping Ambassador Yovanovitch when she was going to be there in the testimony room. They needed her to understand the specifics on Hunter Biden on the Burisma board.
Think about that, Maria. What her testimony was, there are thousands of companies in Ukraine. And in preparation for her confirmation hearing, the Obama-Biden State Department briefed her on one company, Burisma, the company that was paying Joe Biden's sons obscene amounts of money, a corrupt company that was paying him obscene amounts of money, a company who was being investigated, and the prosecutor who was investigating that was fired 6 hours after Joe Biden demanded that he be fired. So, the president has every right to take care that our laws are faithfully executed, and the Hunter Biden contract presents a prima facie case of corruption on its face, and it's totally appropriate for us to be looking at that relationship. We ought to have that testimony in an impeachment trial that relates to questions about investigations.
So the question becomes, where is this all going? I mean, in this upcoming week, you've got 8 more witnesses coming down to testify, and yet there is a strong belief out there that your colleagues on the left are sort of railroading this through, trying to get as much done as possible before Thanksgiving, and perhaps to beat the IG report that's coming out, which is looking at the origins of the Russia probe. That's going to be coming out soon as well. Let me get you to respond to what Lindsey Graham told me last weekend on this program in terms of any impeachment inquiry headed to the Senate. Watch this.
I think it's important to find out what really did happen regarding the firing of the prosecutor and what was the conflict of interest that Hunter Biden had. But back to the whistleblower, it's impossible to bring this case forward, in my view, fairly, without us knowing who the whistleblower is and having a chance to cross-examine them about any biases that they may have. So if they don't call the whistleblower in the House, this thing is dead on arrival in the Senate.
Dead on arrival in the Senate. What does that mean, Congressman, in terms of this whole process?
Means this is a waste of time. I think the Democrats know that. Look, you have Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, which is now the House Impeachment Committee, that already voted to impeach the president. They've made up their mind. And this is dead on arrival without fairly looking at the most important witnesses. They don't want the whistleblower to come in because it has now been discovered that Chairman Schiff's office coordinated for that person to become the whistleblower. The other thing that Chairman Schiff hasn't done, you talk about witnesses and transcripts, he hasn't released the Inspector General's transcript, the first transcript of the first witness, because it will tell you what the Inspector General knew and didn't know about the relationship between Chairman Schiff and the whistleblower, based on what Chairman Schiff and the whistleblower did or didn't reveal to the Inspector General. So this is such an unfair process. I think everyone sees that Republicans are dealing with an inquiry where we have not just one but 2 hands tied behind our back. But despite that, the Democrats are still losing. In a case where we talk about impeaching a president, it should be clear, it should be egregious, and it should be bipartisan, and it's none of those things.
Yeah. You know what? Stay with us, Congressman, because I want to ask you about connecting the dots here to the origins of the Russia probe. Coming up, we understand from William Barr that the IG report is imminent. We're going to take a look at that, as well as talk about those transcripts that you'd like released, because I know you need to be able to bring that up in questioning this upcoming week. Follow me on